September 14th, 1944, Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The rec hall lights dimmed, and Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann settled into his wooden chair alongside 400 other German prisoners. The projectionist, a bored American corporal, threaded the first reel as he had every Thursday and Sunday night for the past 6 months. On the makeshift screen fashioned from white bedsheets, the MGM lion roared. Hartmann had received a Red Cross letter that morning. His sister wrote from Hamburg in careful, censored language. "The neighborhood is different now," she had written. "Many families have moved away suddenly. We sleep in the cellar. The bread ration was reduced again." Between those sparse lines, Hartmann could read the truth. Hamburg was burning. His family was starving. The 1,000 bomber raids had turned his city into rubble. Yet here he sat, 5,000 miles from that destruction, about to watch his second American movie of the week. The previous Sunday had been a Western. Tonight promised a Technicolor musical. The cognitive dissonance made his hands shake. How could a nation fighting a global war across 2 oceans produce entertainment on this scale? How could his captors screen movies twice weekly for enemy prisoners while simultaneously destroying German cities? The opening credits rolled for Meet Me in St. Louis. Judy Garland appeared in brilliant color, singing in a house that glowed with electric lights and abundance. Hartmann closed his eyes, but he couldn't block out the sound. The theater's speakers, better quality than most German cinemas before the war, filled the hall with orchestral music. When he opened his eyes again, he was watching a vision of American domestic life that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda about a decadent, collapsing society. What Hartmann didn't yet understand was that this weekly ritual represented something far more devastating than military defeat. These Hollywood films, casually screened for enemy prisoners, were systematically demolishing Nazi ideology through the simple power of industrial entertainment. The Americans weren't just winning the war with tanks and planes. They were winning it with Technicolor and MGM, with stories and songs, with an entertainment industry so vast it could afford to share its products with men who had tried to kill American soldiers just months earlier. The Third Reich had told German soldiers that America was culturally bankrupt, morally corrupt, racially degenerate. Yet the evidence flickering across that bedsheet screen told a different story entirely. A nation with such resources, such technical sophistication, such confident abundance that it could produce elaborate musicals while fighting the greatest war in history was no weakling. It was a colossus. And Hartmann, like 370,000 other German POWs scattered across American camps, was about to spend the next 18 months learning this lesson twice weekly in darkened halls, watching Hollywood movies while their homeland burned. Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had built an entire ideology around American cultural weakness. German troops departing for war received pamphlets describing the United States as a mongrel nation where Jewish Hollywood produced degenerate films that rotted the American soul. The German newsreels, carefully controlled by Goebbels' ministry, had shown carefully selected footage of American poverty, crime, and racial conflict. They depicted a society on the verge of collapse, divided by class warfare, too soft and pleasure-seeking to sustain serious military effort. The Kraft durch Freude, Strength Through Joy program had provided German workers with occasional theatrical performances and concerts, but film production in Germany was tightly controlled and rationed. By 1943, German cinemas operated on reduced schedules due to power shortages and film stock scarcity. The UFA studios in Berlin, once Europe's finest, produced perhaps 30 films annually by 1944, many of them propaganda pieces rather than entertainment. German soldiers, including those captured in Tunisia and Italy, expected American prison camps to be harsh. They anticipated bare minimum treatment, perhaps hunger, certainly no luxuries. International Red Cross regulations required adequate food and shelter, but entertainment, that seemed impossible for a nation supposedly stretched to breaking by global war. The discovery began at processing camps in North Africa. American soldiers casually mentioned camp movie nights to incoming prisoners. The Germans assumed it was propaganda, another lie to soften them for interrogation. They would understand the truth soon enough. Camp Concordia in Kansas constructed its recreation hall in October 1943, just weeks after receiving its first German prisoners. The building seated 650 men, featured a professional projection booth, and showed films 3 times weekly. This was not unique. Camp Hearn in Texas seated 800. Camp Aliceville in Alabama had 2 theaters. Camp Clarinda in Iowa showed films 4 times weekly to accommodate all prisoners. By summer 1944, the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office had established standardized procedures. Every camp with more than 500 prisoners would receive regular film shipments from a rotating catalogue of 200 titles. The logistics involved staggered the German prisoners who witnessed them. Films arrived in protective cases, shipped by dedicated courier service. Projection equipment, often 35mm professional systems, came from manufacturers still producing for civilian theaters. The celluloid itself, made from nitrate stock that required careful storage, represented materials Germany had rationed for war production. Yet Americans were using it to entertain enemy prisoners. Feldwebel Otto Becker, captured at Anzio, wrote in his secret diary after arriving at Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, "They have built a theater that seats 1,000 men. The projection system exceeds quality of Berlin's finest cinemas. The screen is enormous, the sound perfect. This for prisoners. What must their own soldiers enjoy?" The film selection revealed American abundance in ways statistics couldn't convey. Camps received both new releases and recent films, typically only 12 to 18 months old. German prisoners in 1944 watched movies from 1943, sometimes late 1942. The delay was minimal, especially compared to German-occupied territories, where films, if shown at all, were years outdated. The variety astounded men who had known only controlled German productions. One week brought Casablanca with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman in a story celebrating resistance against Nazis. The irony of showing this to German prisoners was apparently lost on American authorities, or perhaps it was entirely intentional. The next week might bring a musical like Yankee Doodle Dandy, celebrating American patriotism through James Cagney's energetic performance. Then a comedy, The More the Merrier, showing Americans coping with wartime housing shortages through humor rather than despair. Then a western, The Oxbow Incident, exploring themes of justice and mob violence with moral complexity German propaganda had claimed Americans couldn't comprehend. Unterfeldwebel Werner Burkhardt described his first screening in a letter that passed censors. "We watched an American film called Shadow of a Doubt. It was a thriller, well-made, suspenseful. But what struck me was the setting. A small California town where every house had automobiles, refrigerators, telephones. The villain was interesting because he was American, shown with psychological depth. There was no propaganda about the war. It was simply entertainment, produced while they fight us. How wealthy must a nation be to make such films for amusement while conducting global war?" The Technicolor productions delivered particular psychological impact. German film industry had experimented with color, but the complexity and cost had limited it to perhaps half a dozen films before 1939. UFA's color productions were prestigious events. Hollywood produced dozens of Technicolor films annually and showed them to German prisoners as routine entertainment. The Wizard of Oz, screened at camps across America in late 1943 and early 1944, became a revelation. The transition from sepia-toned Kansas to Technicolor Oz stunned men who had rarely seen color film. More significantly, the production values, the elaborate sets, the special effects, the hundreds of extras in costume represented an investment in pure entertainment that exceeded Germany's total propaganda film budget for a year. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, an educated man who had worked in publishing before conscription, wrote with growing understanding, "They showed us Gone with the Wind last night. 4 hours, Technicolor throughout, thousands of extras. Atlanta burning was created with such realistic effects that some prisoners had to leave, reminded of Hamburg. But here's what terrifies me. This film was made in 1939 before America even entered the war. While we were invading Poland, they were making entertainment spectacles. What does this say about their resources?" The musicals particularly challenged Nazi propaganda about American cultural degeneracy. Yankee Doodle Dandy, For Me and My Gal, Meet Me in St. Louis. These elaborate productions featured orchestras, dancers, expensive costumes and sets that depicted American life as comfortable, optimistic, abundant. The stories, while simple, were told with technical sophistication that German prisoners recognized as first-rate craftsmanship. Lieutenant Friedrich Schmidt, a trained musician, observed after watching Orchestra Wives at Camp Como. The Glenn Miller Orchestra appears in this film. 18 musicians, all professional quality. The arrangements are complex, the recordings superb. In Germany, such musicians would be conscripted for war production. Here, they make entertainment films. The female vocalist has a voice that would grace Berlin's finest opera houses. She sings popular songs in a Hollywood movie. This allocation of talent to entertainment while fighting a war reveals priorities we never understood. The technical quality of Hollywood productions educated prisoners about American industrial capacity. The sound recording, consistently crisp and clear, required sophisticated equipment. The editing, smooth and professional, demonstrated trained technicians. The lighting, especially in noir films like Double Indemnity, showed mastery of cinematic craft. Even the opening credits with their elaborate designs and typography exceeded anything in German cinema. By early 1945, some camps had received over 200 different films. Prisoners could watch virtually the entire recent output of Hollywood studios. They saw MGM's prestige productions, Warner Brothers crime dramas, Paramount's comedies, Fox's musicals, Universal's horror films. The variety itself was educational. No single studio controlled everything. Competition produced excellence. This democratic chaos generated better results than Germany's controlled, centralized system. The contrast between screen and reality created devastating psychological impact. After watching Since You Went Away, a drama about American homefront sacrifice, prisoners would return to barracks and read Red Cross letters describing real German sacrifice. The American film showed families coping with rationing, blackouts, and absent fathers. The German letters described starvation, firebombing, and total social collapse. American screen families had refrigerators, automobiles, telephones, multiple rooms, abundant food. They complained about butter rationing while eating full meals. German families, according to letters reaching the camps, burned furniture for heat, ate bread that was more sawdust than grain, and lived in cellars to avoid bombing raids. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann, after watching The Human Comedy in March 1945, wrote a letter his family never received. The postal system in Germany had collapsed by then. The Americans show us films about their hardships. A boy delivers telegrams telling families their sons have died. This is meant to show us they suffer too. But even in this sad story, the houses are beautiful, the food is plentiful, the town is safe. Our suffering has no comparison. We are watching fairy tales while Germany dies. The guilt became overwhelming for many prisoners. While they sat in comfortable halls watching Judy Garland sing about better days ahead, their families endured horrors they could barely imagine. The mail that did arrive through Red Cross channels came in envelopes so thin they were translucent, written on whatever scraps of paper recipients could find, in pencil, because ink was unavailable. The messages were brief because longer letters cost more to send. Every word was weighed, maximizing information while minimizing cost. Yet twice weekly, prisoners watched 2-hour spectacles that had cost millions of dollars to produce, shown to them free of charge as enemy prisoners. The mathematical impossibility of this arrangement forced cognitive reckoning. Germany had mobilized every resource for total war, stripped civilians to bare survival, and still couldn't match American military production. America was feeding, housing, and entertaining 425,000 enemy prisoners, including weekly movies, while simultaneously outproducing Germany in every war material category. The variety of American life portrayed in films shattered Nazi racial theories. Cabin in the Sky, an all-black musical, showed African Americans as talented musicians, dancers, and actors. Nazi propaganda had taught that black people were inferior, incapable of culture, yet here was evidence of artistic achievement that surpassed most German productions. Stormy Weather, another all-black film, featured Lena Horne and Bill Robinson in performances that dazzled audiences regardless of prejudice. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, captured at Salerno, observed after watching Cabin in the Sky. The Negroes in this film demonstrate musical and theatrical talent exceeding anything I saw in Berlin's best theaters. We were told they were primitive, incapable of civilization, yet they perform in productions requiring sophisticated technical support, professional training, artistic sensitivity. Everything we were taught was lies. The Western genre provided unexpected education about American mythology. Films like The Oxbow Incident, Destry Rides Again, and Stagecoach showed Americans grappling with themes of justice, violence, community, and law. These weren't simple good versus evil tales. They were morally complex stories that trusted audiences to think. German prisoners, educated men who had read philosophy and history, recognized the sophistication. These were films that asked questions rather than providing answers, that showed flawed heroes and sympathetic villains, that suggested democracy was messy and difficult, but worth the struggle. This complexity contradicted everything Goebbels had said about American cultural simplicity. By late 1944, the entertainment program expanded beyond films. Some camps received phonograph records, allowing prisoners to hear American music. Jazz, swing, big band sounds that Nazi Germany had banned as degenerate Negro music became enormously popular. Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, their recordings revealed another dimension of American culture. The music was sophisticated, requiring trained musicians and complex arrangements. It was joyful, even while Americans fought and died. It represented freedom of expression that totalitarian Germany had never permitted. The distribution system itself educated prisoners about American logistics. Films arrived on schedule, transported across thousands of miles by dedicated courier service. They came in protective cases, carefully maintained. Damaged reels were replaced quickly. The projection equipment received regular maintenance. Backup parts were readily available. This systematic reliability, applied to entertainment for enemy prisoners, demonstrated organizational capacity that prisoners increasingly recognized as decisive. Oberst Hermann Goetz, the senior German officer at Camp McCain in Mississippi, reported to International Red Cross inspectors in January 1945. The Americans maintain a film program for prisoners that exceeds anything available to German civilians before the war. They show current Hollywood productions, major studio films, on equipment that surpasses most German civilian cinemas. The projection is flawless, the sound quality exceptional. This is not propaganda, this is simply how they operate. Such casual excellence in a minor aspect of prisoner administration suggests capability in major operations that we never imagined. The psychological transformation was measurable. Intelligence officers conducting interviews noted that prisoners who had attended camp film programs regularly showed markedly different attitudes than those who refused. The regular viewers expressed more realistic assessment of American capabilities, less adherence to Nazi propaganda, greater willingness to discuss German defeat honestly. The films hadn't converted them politically, but they had educated them economically and culturally. Major Edward Davison, commanding the re-education program at Fort Getty, Rhode Island, wrote in February 1945, "The film program accomplishes what lectures cannot." Hollywood movies demonstrate American industrial depth, cultural sophistication, and resource abundance. Prisoners see evidence they cannot dismiss as propaganda. They watch their guards watching the same films, enjoying the same entertainment. This shared experience humanizes Americans in ways that undermine Nazi dehumanization. As Germany's collapse accelerated in early 1945, the disconnect between screen and reality became absolute. While prisoners watched National Velvet or Laura or Gaslight, news reached camps of Berlin burning, Dresden destroyed, civilians fleeing westward. The American films showed problems and conflicts, but always within context of fundamental security and abundance. The German reality was apocalyptic. Lieutenant Josef Kramer described the dissonance in April 1945. "Last night we watched Going My Way, a gentle comedy about a Catholic priest in New York. Bing Crosby sang, children played, problems were solved through kindness. This morning, letters arrived telling us the Russians have reached the Oder. My family is evacuating on foot, carrying what they can. The contrast is beyond comprehension. We are watching cheerful films about American life while our civilization ends." The film program continued after German surrender. Through summer 1945, as prisoners awaited repatriation, they continued watching Hollywood movies twice weekly. Now the films included captured German newsreels showing concentration camps, Nazi atrocities, the full scope of what their government had done. These documentaries, shown between Hollywood entertainment features, completed the education that had begun with Technicolor musicals. The realization spread through the camps. A nation that could produce Gone with the Wind while preparing for war, that could show Judy Garland musicals to enemy prisoners while destroying German cities, that could maintain such casual entertainment abundance alongside total military mobilization, possessed power beyond anything Nazi ideology had conceived. The Hollywood films hadn't just entertained. They had educated. They had demonstrated twice weekly for 18 months that American strength came from freedom, abundance, and confidence rather than force, scarcity, and fear. When prisoners finally returned to Germany in 1946, they brought memories of American films that contrasted sharply with German reality. They had watched hundreds of hours of Hollywood productions showing American life, American values, American capabilities. They had seen evidence projected in 35mm Technicolor that everything Nazi propaganda taught about American weakness was comprehensively wrong. Obergefreiter Klaus Hartmann, who had watched Meet Me in St. Louis on that September night in 1944 while Hamburg burned, returned home in May 1946 to find his city still in ruins. His family had survived barely, living in a basement apartment in a partially destroyed building. But when American movies began showing in reconstructed Hamburg theaters in 1947, Hartmann took his sister to see them. She asked how American films could be so elaborate, so expensive, so confident. He told her what he had learned as a prisoner. "This is what we fought. This is what defeated us. Not just their armies, but this. A nation so wealthy it makes dreams for entertainment. So strong it showed those dreams to enemies. So confident it knew we would watch and understand that we never had a chance." The Hollywood films shown to German POWs represented one of history's most effective, if unintentional, psychological warfare programs. They demonstrated American power not through threats, but through abundance, not through propaganda, but through entertainment, not through lectures, but through stories. They achieved what bullets couldn't, the complete intellectual defeat of Nazi ideology through the simple evidence of what American society could casually produce while simultaneously winning the greatest war in history. The twice-weekly movie programs cost the United States approximately $2 million annually, a microscopic fraction of military spending. Yet they educated 370,000 German prisoners more effectively than any propaganda campaign. These men returned to Germany as witnesses to American abundance, carriers of knowledge that would shape post-war German attitudes toward democracy, capitalism, and the Atlantic Alliance. The projectionist at Camp Shelby probably never considered the strategic implications of threading "Meet Me in St. Louis" into his projector that September night. He was just doing his job, providing recreation for prisoners as regulations required. But in doing so, he was fighting the war as surely as any bomber pilot. The beam of light projecting Judy Garland onto a bedsheet screen was carrying a message more devastating than any bomb. America possessed such staggering abundance, it could entertain its enemies while destroying their armies. German prisoners learned this lesson twice weekly in darkened halls across America. They learned it while their cities burned, their families starved, and their nation collapsed. They learned it through Technicolor and music, through stories and stars, through the casual excellence of Hollywood's dream factory, operating at full capacity, while America fought the world. When the lights came up after each showing, prisoners filed out past American guards who had watched the same films, enjoyed the same entertainment. This equality of access to culture, this democratic distribution of even prison camp diversions, demonstrated something fundamental about American society that Nazi hierarchy could never comprehend. The Hollywood films didn't just entertain German prisoners. They educated them, transformed them, and ultimately helped defeat the ideology they had fought for. The movies that flickered across bedsheet screens in camps across America proved more powerful than propaganda because they were true. They showed an America that really existed, abundant and confident, strong enough to share its dreams even with enemies who had tried to destroy it.